Ted writes, why when he's using my Autozero script is he still getting shallow cut marks in the spoilboard? So today we're going to have a look at 5 possible reasons for that. Hello fellow CNCnutz and welcome. Today I'm going to attempt to answer Ted's question as to why when he's using my Autozero script that he's still getting shallow cut marks in his spoilboard. Now I should point out that these issues also plague the rest of the Autozero scripts out there as well, just that they go unnoticed. Because my script, you expect it to cut exactly through the material and not into the spoilboard. Anything that doesn't match that is noticed. With the other scripts, it's pretty normal for them to either slice through the material and into the spoilboard or not even make it through the material in some cases. And in those issues, nobody thinks any more about it. And that's just the way they work. So, let's have a look at some possible answers to Ted's question. So the first thing to check, and by far the easiest, is the armature on your spindle. Make sure that there's no up and down movement occurring on that armature. While you're at it, just check there's no backwards, forwards, left and right movement at all. It should be rock solid. This here is the original laminate trimmer of my first CNC machine. And after many years of sterling service, I noticed that it wasn't machining very well. And I found there's about 0.5 millimeter movement backwards and forwards on the shaft here. The bearing sort of sounded all right, and as far as you can hear a laminate trimmer running. It's certainly not gravelly, it moves fine, but there's definitely a backwards forward movement of about 0.5 millimeter 20th thou. And when you've got that, you haven't got a snowball's chance in hell of machining anything to a set height. So check number 1, make sure there's no play in your spindle's armature. Now don't take it for granted that just because your router is brand new that its bearings will be okay. Check it. I've seen new ones with that exact same problem. So it takes a second to check and it's well worth doing. Now the next check is the gantry. Make sure there's no movement that shouldn't be there. I can grab my gantry like this here and try and move it. If the bearings that it runs on here are loose, the whole gantry will move. Now that will affect your cutter's depth. It may be okay without load on it, but as soon as it comes under load, the whole gantry moves and changes angle. And now this cutting tip here that was before level is now deeper than it should be and could cut a deeper groove, which ends up cutting into your tabletop when it comes under load. So that's the second check. Fortunately, again, it's just a simple matter of doing that, and you'll very quickly know whether the bearings on your gantry are loose or not. Now this one here is a bit more bizarre, and I mention it for the sake of completeness. If you're like me and have an MDF tabletop, and you don't surface it very often, I very rarely surface the tabletop here, the MDF can absorb moisture, especially in a damp climate like I live in. What happens is the areas of the MDF may not absorb moisture at the same rate. And when MDF absorbs moisture, of course, it swells. So you might find this part of the tabletop is actually a little bit lower than over here. So if you find you're machining through, you set your cutter, say, over here, and you're machining through and maybe scarring up the tabletop here and yet not making it through the material there, but it's perfectly fine where you zeroed the cutter, the possibility is the MDF tabletop is swollen a little bit and is now no longer flat and level. If I'm machining something that's critical, say a V-carve or a 3D model that I know needs to be absolutely flat, then I might just skim the tabletop. I'll just skim it at the lowest point to make sure the table remains nice and flat. But it's just something that is a possibility. Now, I know it's not Ted's issue in this particular case because he has only just finished surfacing his tabletop. So let's have a look at the next possibility. Now, the next possibility is accuracy. How accurate is the measurement of this plate thickness? How well calibrated is my Z-axis? If either of those are out, then I won't be cutting the correct depth. Now, of course, instead of using these expensive vernier calipers here, accurate to the nearest gnat's cock, I instead use these here cheap $20 pair of digital calipers that have seen better days. And just how accurate these are, I have absolutely no idea. So that's one thing to be aware of. Now, when it came to setting up my Z-axis movement, I used a dial, and so this here should be very accurate indeed. But again, that doesn't matter. If this isn't correct, then it's not going to move the right amount, and I could end up not cutting through my material or cutting into my tabletop. And there's one simple way to check you're not cutting into your tabletop. So this test is going to test how accurate the block thickness I put into the script is and how well it matches my Z-axis movement. It won't tell me if the calibration or block thickness is out, but it will tell me how well these will work together. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Autozero script, and I'm going to enter a material thickness of 0. Now I can enter the MDI command Z0, and the cutter will come down to the surface of the spoilboard. Now, using a torch, I can check to see just how well that cutter tip is sitting on the surface of the material, and that looks really good. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the spindle on, just take it for a wee test drive in the area of this where this block was, to make sure that it isn't running deeper than I think it is. Now that's perfect. I could just hear the slight sound of the cutter touching the surface of the spoilboard here in a couple of places, and but I cannot see any marks on it at all. So that is perfectly calibrated. Now, if when I did it, the cutter actually cut into the material here, then I would need to increase the value of my block thickness, and if when I check it with the light there's a gap beneath the cutter, then I would need to tell it that the block is a little bit thinner. And if you're interested in these battle scars here, I can tell you that these are caused by stupidity. And my final thought is it could be lost steps on the Z-axis. Maybe a bit unlikely, because I think you'll be noticing other issues as well, but it's always worth a check, and it's simple to do. Simply put a pencil mark on the coupler and on the body of the machine there. Once you've got that there all set to your part. After you've machined your part, return it to origin point and check that those lines are still all lined up. If they are, then you're not losing steps. If they're not, you are losing steps. One thing I should mention is also make sure you mark the lead screw with relation to the coupler as well. Make sure the lead screw isn't slipping in that, because if it is, you're effectively losing steps as well. Well, those are my 5 thoughts. It's really going to be interesting to find out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to send this video off to Ted. Hopefully he'll be able to give that a test on his machine and get back to us with what he finds. So feel free to amuse yourself for a few minutes. What a truly wonderful age we live in. I sent those suggestions off to Ted, and while I was hard at work sleeping, he was hard at work on the other side of the world checking through my suggestions. When I get up this morning, there's an email waiting for me with the answer in hand. So, how did we do? Well, first he checked the spindle bearings and found they were good as gold, which is excellent news. He also checked the bearings on the X and Z axis. No problem there whatsoever. Likewise with losing steps. He wasn't losing steps, so that just leaves us only a couple more. Next, we had the levelness of the spoilboard. Remember me saying about expansion and contraction due to moisture. Now, this takes quite a while to happen. I knew that wasn't an issue for him to start with, simply because he only recently resurfaced the spoilboard. But like I said, this takes quite a while, and you may never come across it. It will depend on the moisture levels you have around your area, but more importantly, the quality of the MDF you're using. And it's only when it doesn't expand and contract at the same rate. So if it expands faster here or more here than it did over there, then you're going to end up with your table out of level again. But it takes quite a while, not really a serious issue anyway. I just simply mention it as a possible suggestion. So that just leaves us the touch-off plate thickness and of course the Z-axis calibration. Now he went through and checked with the digital calipers his touch-off plate again, and he ended up revising it as being a little thicker than he had. And that alleviated the problem a little bit, but he was still getting those marks in the spoilboard, just not as deep. So finally he checked the Z-axis calibration, and that's where he found his problem. Having resolved that, it now cuts properly, cuts through the material and not into the tabletop, which is excellent news. And that's about it, really. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, maybe learned something new, and never need to use any of the information contained within. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out my website, www.CNCnutz.com. Okay, well, I'll check you on the next episode. Cheers.